Okay, we're going to start this part with talking about parallel lines. All right, so parallel lines, you're probably thinking, well, I already know that. I've heard about parallel lines. I know what it means. It means they're never going to touch. Well, that is correct. That's not the precise definition, and you have to know the exact definition. Later on in chapter 3, we're going to talk about skew lines, where also those lines never intersect. However, there's a distinct difference between parallel and skew. Okay, parallel lines, they have to be on the same plane. If they're not on the same plane, you can't call them parallel. They would, and if lines never intersect and are not on the same plane, they're called skew. We'll get to that in chapter 3. But you need to understand this part, coplanar lines. That's important part of that definition. That distincts, that is the precise definition. All right. And they do not intersect, of course. All right, perpendicular lines. That is a definition that is forgotten. I don't know why, but when I ask students, give me the precise definition of perpendicular lines, they tell me lines that intersect, or they can't tell me the definition at all. And I preach it and I preach it and I preach it. So I'm asking that you make sure you understand the precise definition right now, okay? They are intersecting lines and form 4 right angles, okay? That is huge. That is important, right? Very, very important. Yes, they intersect, but there's something so special about those intersecting lines that they have to give it a special name, okay? It has to be called something special, and we call that perpendicular. All right, the last definition on this slide is circles. I've seen several different wording of how the definition is formatted, but the gist is the same, okay? The term locus is the points that form that circle. A locus of all points equidistant from a central point. That part right there, equidistant from a central point, that is the main part of the definition. So if you see a different type of wording, that's okay. As long as we're talking from an equidistant point from a central point, that's a circle, okay? All right, so we have this figure here, and this is a multi-select question. All right, and on your notes, I said you didn't have to write down all the choices because there's another problem later on in the slide that it's a lot more choices and it could be overwhelming. This is an example that students just had trouble with on answering, just because multi-select is so tricky. When you look at a multi-select question, you want to hurry up and click something. You want to just find the answer. And that's when you tend to screw up, because in a multi-select, there are multiple correct choices. Every now and then, it's tricky, and there's only one correct choice. I hate those problems too, because you think you're doing something wrong. When you approach a multi-select question, you have to take each choice as its own problem, okay? Each choice is its own true or false statement, all right? You decide. If it's true, you mark it true, you move on. If it's false, you leave it be, move on to the next choice. So this says, what are 2 other ways to name line easy? Now, it's important to pay attention to the marking above it. Very important. Read the question, read the question, read the question. I cannot stress that enough. And I'm starting on day 1, and we're going to go all the way through January, repeating the same thing. You have to read the question. You have to read all the choices. Then go back, read the question again. Make sure you understand what it's asking for, okay? To where you can answer it appropriately. So you take one choice at a time. So the first choice, it has a line, okay? That's good. However, you have to make sure that it fits the criteria of what's being asked. So it's a capital E and a lowercase s. And if I look at the picture, E is on the line, but lowercase s is not representing a point, as we discussed in the last video, the first half of this lesson. So lowercase s is, it's representing the whole line, okay? So I can't name it if it's not a point on the line, all right? So I'll leave that alone. ZF, all right, those are 2 points on that same line EF. So that is another way, and it's appropriately denoted on the top, okay? So I would select it. Next is line M, which is passing through that line. So I'll just ignore it. I can visibly see that's not what choice. Line S. Remember, when we talked about basic definitions, line S, lowercase italicized s, does represent a line, okay? And it is talking about line EZ. So I'll check it. All right, ZL. Those are 2 points that would form a completely different line. So it's not describing the line that we're talking about. And the last one is array. So I've selected the correct 2. Now you're probably asking, well, Ms. Khaled, why did you not just stop after you got your 2 choices? Well, because mistakes happen, all right? So if you go through your choices and you're like, wait a minute, it could have been this one, you know, and then you go back and you see, are you wrong at this moment? Or were you wrong in the previous choices? Did you select something by mistake? You know, just take your time with it. I always recommend that you go through all your choices before you hit submit, right? You want to make sure that you did everything correctly. All right, so there's different styles of how this question is going to be asked. This particular one is saying name all the segments. There's another one that says name all the arrays, name all the lines. Okay, so this figure is a line made up of points. Okay, therefore segments can be created, arrays can be created. So you want to make sure that you read it carefully, understand that it's asking for segments, not arrays, and so go accordingly to with the correct symbol that would be denoted at the top of the letters. I highly recommend, okay, for whatever reason, students don't always, they like to keep it in a small box. I highly recommend that you maximize your screen. Why? Because choices get cut off. Okay, I've had students, they do the multi-select, they're like, I'm going through all the options. It's telling me I'm wrong. I don't understand. All right, so I'll look at it and I'm like, all the choices you have selected are correct. None of the ones that you haven't selected fit the criteria. So then we scroll down, okay, and I show them, oh, look, you had 2 other choices, M and N. They weren't there before. Okay, you have to maximize your viewing screen. That way you can make sure you see all your choices. All right, so it's a segment. So anything that's denoting anything but a segment, you move past it. B, C, both of those points are on the line, so it's a choice. It works out. This is array. D, E, there is no point E. Okay, so I move on. That can't be a segment because it's not a point on that line. C, D, yes. This is representing a line, not a line segment, so I move on. B, D, yes, both of those points are on there. A and B, yes. This is denoting a line, I move on. E is not a point, we've already established that, move on. This is array, A and C are both on there, A and D are both on there. The trick is, notice what I did. I didn't just look at the whole screen. I went line by line, okay, and made sure that it fit the criteria. All right, so this particular question, you'll see it given to you 2 different ways. Make sure that you read it correctly. There's one that, maybe 3. One that talks about lines, ask for all the lines. One that talks about all the arrays, and one that talks about all the segments. Remember what is a line? Has to have 2 arrows. Line segments, 2 endpoints. An array, 1 endpoint, and an arrow extending towards the opposite direction. So we're asking for lines, all right? So that means I have to have arrows. Well, if I'm looking at my illustration, there's only one. Has an arrow on both ends, okay? Now, if you look at your choices, there is, and the points on here are K and F. So the only line is KF, line KF. Well, okay, that's correct. But if you look at option D, and you should look at all your options before you make your final decision, it says there are 2 lines, KF and FK. Now, some people have accidentally selected it thinking, well, those are 2 different ways to name this line. While that's correct, that's not what the question was asking. The question only asks, how many lines are there? Didn't ask, what are all the ways that you can name that line? Okay, and this statement is also saying that there are 2 lines, and when we know there's only one. Okay, so C is your best option. All right, be careful with these. Students tend to hate these, and I understand exactly why. I wish you had a pen or a highlighter in my math lab that you could write on it. Can't. if you know something of an app or whatever, let me know. I'd love to, help you out there. Okay. But as of right now, I don't know of anything. So if you know something, let me know, because it would be very beneficial. So when you name in the plane, you can obviously see it's a four-sided figure. So you know that there's 4 points. But here, there is only 3 listed because you only need 3 points to name a plane. 3 non-collinear points to name a plane. All right, so if I'm talking about Y, H, and J, all right, well, that means I'm talking about this bottom plane. V, Y, W. That means I'm talking about the front plane, okay? So if I'm at the bottom and the front, we already talked about the intersection of 2 planes is a line. A line consists of 2 points. Has to have the arrows on both ends. That's a line, not a line segment. Even though it appears to be a line, technically it is a line segment and it could extend to opposite directions going to infinity. So you have to name it accordingly. So at the bottom and in the front is YH, okay? So if I look right here, I have 2 choices with YH, here and here. This one has the arrows, this one does not. So this is your line, okay? All right, this particular problem again stood a tape. Why? Because we're talking about planes and it's hard to see. So use your imagination, use your finger to highlight if you can, if you don't have that tool. So line FA is right here. That's to the left and in the back. So I'm looking at the font. I want to find a description that's describing the plane on the left and in the back. So if I look, okay, so first choice, take one choice at a time and go through each plane description one at a time. So F or V, F or V. All right, that's on the left. Okay, good, good. Let's see if the other plane is in the back. If it is, there's our choice. N-A-T, N-A and T. Yes, it's in the back. So it just so happened that the first choice worked out. Go through each choice. More than likely on something that's kind of complex like this, it's either going to be your first or second choice. Possibly C or D. But in my experience, it's either been the first or the second. Every now and then, anytime something where you have to do a lot of it's a longer process. And even though it's just thinking and you're just observing, it is kind of a long process. So anytime it's a multiple choice like that, where there is a longer process, it's either one of your first 2 choices because you have to do a process of elimination. So in my experience, it's problems where you have to, it's a longer process and you must go through each option to eliminate. It's always been one of the first 2. Okay, so this particular problem here, it says name a point that's coplanar with the 3 given, B, L, and P. So those 3 points are 3 that are on the top of the box. Okay, so you just want to name the 4th one. Well, that's easy. It's D. Now, I've seen another problem where I'll ask same question, but it'll say B, D, and M. Okay, so you probably saying, well, there is no line connecting D, B, and M. While that is true, just because a plane's not there doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So you have like this imaginary piece of paper going diagonally through the box. And so I extend it and I make that whole sheet, it extends to N. So your answer would be N. That would be your 4th point. Okay. All right. Last slide. It says always, sometimes, or never true. Now, this particular geometry is very logical. Okay. The whole, don't always think so much into it. Rules and definitions, that's the foundation of geometry. Once you know your rules and your definitions, you take that and you apply it to your problems. So you're going to see some questions like this where I want you to say always, sometimes, or never true. So always is always true. Never is always false. Sometimes, it could be one or the other. So if you can think of a counter example scenario, then it's sometimes. Okay. If you have that doubt, 9 out of 10, it's sometimes, because you have that that one time that it counteracts this statement that, oh, wait, it could be true. Oh, but it could be false if it's this. So this one says 4 points are coplanar. Well, I could have all 4 points on the floor, or I could have 2 on the floor, 1 at the top. Okay, 2 at the top, or 3 on the floor and 1 at the top. It all depends. So yes, it could be sometimes. All right, so you ask yourself true or false. If you have doubt, try and come up with a counterexample. 2 distinct lines intersected more than 1 point. When they talk about distinct, that means 2 completely separate lines. There is no way that they can be the same line. So distinct means separate. So 2 distinct lines intersected more than 1 point. Well, unless they have some kind of curves to them, which would not be a line, there's no way. So this would be never. All right, so that's the end of the lesson. I broke it the video up into 3 parts. Make sure that you have watched all 3 parts. This is your final part. If you have questions, you need to ask. I will not be going through this particular lesson live in class for time purposes. So you need to make sure that if you do have questions, you email me. You try and do your assignments on your own. If you are having trouble on a specific problem, you can't get to it, you need to make sure that you email me with the problem, and I'll address it whenever you come in class, or we can set up a meeting. If I can't explain it within an email, I'll try to do a video, whatever works. This is all new. We have to be patient with one another, and we have to be willing to be flexible. Okay. So I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you when you come to class.